What if the perfect moment was the start of your undoing? The sun was warm, the breeze gentle, and the sea stretched endlessly toward a horizon made of dreams. Everything felt right, until it didn't. What begins with a glance across soft white sands soon unravels into something far more seductive. And far more dangerous. But how do you tell when a fantasy becomes a prison? When the voice that once promised to protect now decides what you wear, who you speak to, and how you breathe. And what happens when escaping means losing the one thing you love most? You think you know where this is going. You don't. Stay. What's coming will break your heart, and maybe put it back together. The sea glittered like molten sapphire, stretching wide and endless beneath a sky painted with soft strokes of gold and cotton white. The Caribbean air was warm and salted, brushing against her skin like a whispered promise. Ivy Quinn let her toes sink into the cool powdery sand, her flip-flops forgotten somewhere behind her. For once, the world felt still. At 22, she was fresh out of nursing school, full of hope and plans and a heart that hadn't yet learned how easily it could be broken. She closed her eyes and let the sun soak into her skin. Her breathing slowed. No force to check, no hospital lights, no buzzers. Just waves, breeze, and the soft rustling of palm fronds overhead. And then, that feeling. The subtle pull of being watched. She turned. He stood a few yards away, alone beneath a shaded cabana. Tall. Impeccably dressed in linen slacks and a black button-down that fit him like it had been tailored by the sea itself. His skin was warm bronze, his hair thick and dark, swept back with casual precision. But it was his eyes that caught her. Deep set. Dark. And utterly unreadable. They didn't smile, not quite, but they held something else. A quiet gravity. Like they knew things. Their gaze held. Don't stare, she told herself. Don't be obvious. But it was too late. He was already walking toward her. Beautiful view, he said, his accent crisp yet smooth, like velvet wrapped in steel. Oh, God, even his voice is a problem. It is, Ivy replied, brushing hair from her face, pretending not to care that her heart had just kicked against her ribs. It doesn't look real. It's real, he said, pausing just close enough for her to feel the edges of his presence. But rare. He offered his hand. Khalid al-Fa'ad. She hesitated. Al-Fa'ad. That sounds. But her instincts didn't scream. In fact, they whispered. She took his hand. Ivy Quinn. The first spark passed between them like a secret. They talked over drinks. And then again the next morning, walking barefoot through tide pools. By the third day, she was skipping her snorkeling tour, just to sit beside him and listen to his stories, tales of desert nights and cities that glittered brighter than the stars above them. He spoke of Riyadh, of family honor, of a life filled with power and tradition, but also of loneliness. She told him about late-night shifts, about her small-town home in Maine, about how she always wanted something bigger than what she had. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, it felt like he saw that truth she tried to bury beneath duty and dreams. You don't belong in a hospital room, Ivy. You belong somewhere you can be adored. Protected. Loved. It didn't happen in a rush. But it didn't happen slowly, either. There was something magnetic about him, his certainty, his elegance, the way he made everything around her fade into background noise. One night, under the starlit beach, he took her hand and asked in a voice like velvet thunder. Come with me to Saudi Arabia. Let me show you a life that will make you forget you ever dreamed small. She laughed nervously, tugging her hand away. That's crazy. We barely know each other. I know you feel it, he whispered. I know you feel what I do. I have a life back home. A job. You have a routine, he corrected gently. You deserve a destiny. He said all the right things. Promised her the world. Promised her she would never have to worry again. Promised her he would take care of her, cherish her. And Ivy, dreamy, curious, aching for something more, Ivy believed him. I'm moving to Saudi Arabia. The words dropped like a stone in water, rippling through the air between Ivy and her mother, breaking the stillness of their small kitchen in Maine. The clock ticked. The kettle whistled low, forgotten on the stove. Her mother blinked, lips parting. You're what? Ivy's voice was soft, but firm. I've thought about it a lot. Khalid. He's serious about me. He wants to take care of me. He offered me a life I never even thought was possible. A life? Her mother's tone cracked, caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. You met this man 2 weeks ago on a beach, Ivy. You don't know him. I do, Ivy said, too quickly. I feel like I do. Her mother stood slowly, pressing both palms against the counter. Honey. That's not love. That's a fantasy. You don't know what you're walking into. His world, it's not ours. The rules, the expectations. It's different. It could be dangerous. He's not like that, Ivy whispered, eyes lowering. He's kind. He listens to me. He says I can be anything, do anything. Except think clearly, her mother shot back, her voice rising. I raised you to be smart. To stand on your own 2 feet. Not to fall for fairy tales wrapped in gold. I'm not a child, Mom. No, you're not. But you're still mine. And I'm scared to death that you're throwing away your life for a man who knows exactly what to say, and exactly how to say it. Ivy looked away, jaw clenched, eyes glassy. I'm going. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. 3 weeks later, Ivy stepped off the private jet into a heat that swallowed her whole. Riyadh shimmered in the distance, its skyline a surreal mix of futuristic towers and traditional domes. The sun beat down, unforgiving. But Khalid was there, waiting with open arms and a smile that made her forget the cold way her mother had turned her back at the airport. This is home now, he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Welcome, Habibti. The drive to his estate took an hour. They passed glistening malls, women cloaked in black abayas, men in long white thobes. Ivy watched it all like a girl in a dream, half dazzled, half disoriented. But when the car turned off the main road and onto a private path lined with palm trees and golden lights, her breath caught. The villa emerged like something out of a painting, vast, white, and radiant against the desert backdrop. Marble fountains danced in the courtyard. Staff bowed as she passed. Crystal chandeliers glittered behind tall arched windows. I told you, Khalid murmured, pulling her close. I would give you a life worth remembering. That night, under a canopy of glowing lanterns, he knelt. A ring of gold and sapphire glinted in the candlelight, as soft music drifted from the garden. Be my wife, Ivy. Let me honor you with everything I have. Tears filled her eyes. Her heart thudded in her chest, drowning out every voice but his. Yes, she whispered. She didn't know it then, but that yes would be the last time she said something entirely her own. The wedding had been a spectacle, golden roses, velvet drapes, fire dancers under starlight. Ivy remembered the way Khalid had looked at her that night, proud, possessive, like she was both a prize and a secret. She wore a dress threaded with diamonds. Guests whispered in Arabic around her, and though she didn't understand the words, she smiled, pretending. But then, the lights faded. The music stopped. And the doors began to close. It started with a request. Small. Harmless. Delete your Instagram, Habibti. You don't need strangers looking at you anymore. Ivy frowned. It's just pictures. My friends. You have me now. And privacy is power, Ivy. Out there, people only want pieces of you. I want all of you. She hesitated. But his eyes were calm, his voice low and tender. And what was social media compared to love? So she deleted it. And then the calls. No more late night chats with your old friends. They don't understand this world. But they're part of who I am. And you're becoming someone new. My wife. You need to let go of who you were to become who you're meant to be. Each step was framed as protection, devotion, care. And each time, she convinced herself, this is normal. This is love. Then came the clothes. The flowing western dresses she once adored were gone. Replaced with abayas, long black robes that covered her from neck to ankle. At first, she resisted. But I look like I'm vanishing, she said, pulling the fabric tighter around her arms. This isn't me. Khalid didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. You are in my country now. And here, my name is your name. What you wear reflects me. He kissed her forehead afterward, like that somehow made it better. Every outing was chaperoned. Every mall trip, every market visit, someone from Khalid's staff walked behind her, eyes sharp. When she once tried to sneak out to the garden alone, the guards stopped her. Sir's orders. She laughed awkwardly. I just wanted to get some fresh air. They didn't move. Weeks passed. Then months. And soon, the house, once dazzling, dreamlike, became a cage. Khalid told her to learn Arabic. Hired a tutor who corrected her relentlessly, who smirked whenever she stumbled. Why do I have to learn so fast? She asked one evening. Khalid looked at her, expression unreadable. Because I don't want to speak English in my home anymore. That language doesn't belong here. He took her books, her American magazines. Cancelled her Skype account. Even the nurses she had started befriending at a local clinic were dismissed, one by one. They were too talkative, he said. Too curious. One night, Ivy tried to call her mother. The phone line was filled with static. A second later, a voice interrupted in Arabic. Then, silence. She turned to Khalid, heart pounding. Did you block my family's number? I'm protecting you from what weakens you, he replied calmly. You have everything you need here. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't even have my own money. You've locked me out of my accounts. Because you don't need to worry about money. That's my role. I give. You receive. The walls grew higher. The air tighter. Her laughter faded. Her voice softened. Her spine, once straight with dreams, began to curl beneath the weight of submission. In the middle of the night, Ivy would wake and press her hand against the cold glass of her bedroom window. Outside, the desert stretched on forever, vast, silent, and merciless. I'm not a wife, she whispered into the dark. I'm a prisoner. And no one could hear her. The day Ivy found out she was pregnant, she cried in silence. Not from fear. Not from sadness. But from something deeper, a fragile kind of hope that took root even in her prison. Her hand rested on her belly, and for the first time in years, something inside her belonged to her alone. When she told Khalid, he broke into a rare, unguarded smile. A daughter, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We'll name her Lily. He kissed her then. Held her closer than he had in months. And for a brief, dangerous moment, she believed things would get better. They didn't. Pregnancy only deepened Khalid's obsession with control. No sugar. No caffeine. No walking outside alone. Sleep at 9. Wake at 7. Every movement, every meal, every breath was monitored. He brought in private doctors, nutritionists, servants, none of whom she could speak to without his presence. Her body no longer felt like hers. It was an extension of his legacy. A vessel for his child. But through the fear, she whispered lullabies at night, cradling her belly. "You're mine, baby girl. Mine." When Lily was born, Ivy wept harder than she ever had. Not out of pain, but from the overwhelming love. A fierce, trembling, all-consuming love. Lily's skin was soft like silk, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around Ivy's. Her eyes, bright, curious, a soft hazel, were the first kindness Ivy had seen in this world in years. The nurses took her away too soon. And from that moment, Ivy was no longer just a prisoner. She was a mother in captivity. The years passed. 5 long years. Lily grew within walls of gold. She learned to bow her head, to lower her gaze, to speak only when spoken to. Her tiny dresses gave way to long robes. Her dolls were replaced by Quranic verses. Her favorite cartoon, a show with singing animals, was taken away. "It's foolishness," Khalid declared. "She needs discipline, not distraction." Ivy watched, helpless, as her daughter's laughter became rare. As her eyes, once full of wonder, began to reflect the same quiet compliance Ivy saw in the mirror every day. "I want to take her to the park," Ivy said one morning, her voice gentle but firm. Khalid didn't look up from his tea. "She has a schedule. She's 5. And she'll be raised with purpose. She's a child, Khalid. She should run, play, make friends." He set the cup down with a quiet clink. "You forget your place again." Ivy stood frozen, a tremor running down her spine. "She's my daughter." He rose slowly, walking to her with terrifying calm. "No. She is ours. But she will grow up in my world. And she will not be poisoned by yours." That night, Ivy lay beside Lily, stroking her daughter's hair as the girl slept peacefully, oblivious. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and hot. "I won't let him steal your soul," she whispered. "Not like he did mine." It was the first time Ivy let herself think it fully, clearly, with conviction. "I have to get us out." It began with a whisper. A moment so quiet, it nearly dissolved in the desert heat. Ivy was kneeling in the courtyard, helping Lily water a line of wilting roses. The sun was soft that morning, cloaking the world in pale gold. The only sound was the trickle of water and Lily's humming. Then, a shadow passed behind her. "Ivy," a voice murmured. Low. Old. Familiar. She turned. It was Yusef, the elderly gardener. His back bent with age, his hands always caked in soil. He rarely spoke beyond respectful greetings. But today, he pressed a scrap of folded paper into her palm, quick, discreet, like handing off contraband. "For you," he whispered. "Hide it." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She slipped the paper into her pocket, without looking, fingers trembling. When she finally unwrapped it in the bathroom, her breath caught. A name. A number. International Women's Refuge Network. Private. Secure. Will help. Her first instinct was to rip it up. Burn it. Forget. He'll kill me if he finds this. But another voice, the one that had been silent for years, whispered back. Call. Now. It took 3 nights to work up the courage. Each moment a war between fear and desperation. When Khalid finally left for a business dinner, Ivy rushed into his study, locked the door, and grabbed the satellite phone from his desk drawer. Her hands were slick with sweat. Her pulse roared in her ears. She dialed. It rang once. Twice. Then. Women's Refuge Network. Are you safe to speak? Yes, she whispered. No, I'm not safe. I have a daughter. I'm trapped. I need help. Please. They asked for her name, location, and a code she could use later to confirm her identity. She had just finished when... Click. The door. It opened. And there he stood. Khalid. Silent. Still. But his eyes were raging fire. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. You were calling them. His voice was calm. Too calm. You were going to run. Khalid, please. He moved toward her, each step precise. You lied to me. In my home. With my child asleep under this roof. His voice dropped. You betrayed me. Tears streamed down her face. You've taken everything from me. I just wanted freedom. He laughed bitterly, sharp and hollow. You Americans think freedom means chaos. I gave you order. I gave you purpose. And this is how you repay me. He opened a drawer and tossed a folder onto the desk. Sign it. She stared at the papers inside. Her name. Lily's name. A custody agreement. One-sided. Brutal. Final. If you want to leave, Khalid said, you go alone. Her knees buckled. No. Stay, and we move forward. You obey. You keep Lily. You live comfortably, under my roof, my rules. Or, he continued coldly, you walk out that gate and never see her again. Hours passed before she could move. Her hands hovered over the pen. Her whole body shook. Lily's laughter echoed faintly from the garden. Ivy pressed her hand to her chest, sobbing quietly. I'm doing this for her. To survive. To fight another day. She signed. With each stroke of ink, something inside her tore. At dawn, she kissed Lily's forehead for the last time. You are my heart, baby. One day, I'll come back for you. I swear it. Then Ivy walked through the gilded gates. Alone. Her body free. Her soul shattered. The airplane touched down on American soil under a gray sky. Ivy sat motionless by the window, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes raw and vacant. She was free. And she had never felt more broken. The first weeks back in Maine passed in a fog. Her childhood home felt both familiar and foreign. Her mother tried to comfort her, but Ivy barely spoke. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. Her body was here, but her heart, her daughter, was half a world away. I left her, she whispered one night, curled on the kitchen floor, sobs racking her chest. I walked away. You did what you had to do to survive, her mother said softly, kneeling beside her. You can still fight for her. Ivy wiped her tears, but guilt clung to her like a second skin. She went to law firms. Women's shelters. Human rights groups. Her voice trembled at first, but each rejection hardened her resolve. Saudi Arabia holds custody based on paternal lineage. Your signature waived maternal rights. We're sorry. There's nothing we can do. Each no cut deeper than the last. But Ivy didn't stop. She researched. She wrote letters. She found online forums of women like her, mothers who had been silenced, erased, exiled from their own children. And then she did the unthinkable. She told her story. Publicly. In interviews. On podcasts. In support groups. My name is Ivy Quinn. I was married to a man who promised me the world, then took away everything. Including my daughter. She became a voice. A rallying cry. And in that, she found a sliver of purpose. Then, one day, an email arrived. From Layla Al-Rashid, Human Rights Attorney Riyadh. Subject, Case. Ivy Quinn Custody Inquiry. Body. I believe you have a case. It will not be easy, but there may be a path. Let's talk. Ivy's hands trembled as she read the message. Her heart thudded against her ribs. There was a way back in. With Layla's guidance, they began building a case, focusing not on custody, but visitation rights. It was a narrow path, but one that had legal precedent. The paperwork was exhaustive. The process, painstaking. But Ivy didn't stop. For 5 years, she fought. And then, the letter came. A Riyadh court had granted her the right to visit Lily, once a month, under supervision. It wasn't enough. But it was something. The first visit took place in a quiet room within a neutral facility, sterile walls, one-way windows, a guard in the corner. Lily was now 10. She entered hesitantly, wearing a small black abaya. Her eyes were cautious, guarded. Ivy's heart ached just looking at her. Hi, baby, she whispered, voice shaking. It's me. Mommy. Lily looked at her. Quiet. Confused. The silence was unbearable. Then Ivy hummed softly. A song. The same lullaby she used to sing years ago, beneath glowing mobiles and whispered dreams. Lily's lips parted. Her brow furrowed. And then, slowly, she mouthed the next line. Tears streamed down Ivy's cheeks. You remember? Lily nodded. I remember, Mommy. It wasn't full custody. It wasn't justice. But it was the beginning of something Ivy had almost forgotten how to believe in. Hope. Lily was 13 when she found her voice. They sat in a quiet garden on the outskirts of Riyadh, the air warm with spring, jasmine blooming around them. Ivy had flown in for her monthly visit, something that had become both ritual and revival. She no longer cried every time they said goodbye, but her heart still cracked a little with each parting. That day, Lily looked up from her tea, her eyes calm, steady. I want to live with you, Mom. In America. I'm ready. Ivy's breath caught. She reached for her daughter's hand across the table. Are you sure? This isn't something we can take back. Lily nodded slowly. I've been sure for a long time. I just needed to be brave enough to say it out loud. Tears shimmered in Ivy's eyes. Not from pain this time, but from pride. Layla, the lawyer who had become both confidant and warrior, saw it for what it was, a turning point. At her age, she said, her wishes have legal weight. If we're careful, if we build the case right, we might finally tip the scale. The legal battle reignited. Old wounds reopened. Khalid hired the best. He accused Ivy of manipulation, of Western poisoning, of planting false dreams in a young girl's head. But Lily stood in court. And she spoke. Clear. Composed. Unshaken. I love my father, she said. But I want to live with my mother, too. I want to know both halves of who I am. The courtroom was silent. The verdict came weeks later. Ivy could barely breathe as the judge began to speak. A split custody ruling. 6 months in America. 6 months in Saudi Arabia. Not a clean win. But not a loss, either. Ivy exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for 5 years. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The day they boarded the plane together, Ivy held Lily's passport like it was made of glass. The terminal lights above them shimmered as they walked side by side toward their gate, matching step for step. No guards. No goodbye orders. No final threats. Just a mother and her daughter. Free. On the plane, Lily leaned her head on Ivy's shoulder. "What now?" she asked. Ivy smiled through tears. "Now? We start again." She kissed her daughter's forehead, then whispered the words that had carried her through every dark hour. "I will always fight for you, Lily. Always." And this time, she didn't whisper it to the wind. She said it into the light. This is not a fairy tale. It is the story of a woman who dared to love, and then dared even more to reclaim herself. At its heart, this is a testament to the unbreakable power of a mother's love, a love that crosses borders, defies systems, and refuses to be silenced. It speaks to the unshakable value of freedom, of the right to choose your path, your voice, your future. Ivy's journey is not just about escape. It's about endurance. About rising from ruin, about finding light in the deepest dark. It's a reminder that even when the world calls you powerless, your spirit can still rise and roar. Because sometimes, love is not the dream. Sometimes, it's the fight,